Tonight, the Iranians shoot down a U.S. drone, and now the war of words is ratcheting up. An expert on the Mideast will join us to look at how we got here and where we go from here. Then a closer look at the Supreme Court case that could have a huge impact on future elections. It involves the census, and we should see a decision within a week. We've got all the details. Also, Alice Johnson was a guest of the president at the State of the Union after he commuted her sentence for drug trafficking. She's now free and wrote a new book about her story. Johnson joins us tonight. Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Andrew Whitman in for Richard French. America's relationship with Iran has gone from bad to worse after the Iranians shoot down a U.S. surveillance drone. President Trump not showing his cards in the escalating tensions between the U.S. and Iran, responding to questions of a potential full-scale war breaking out by telling reporters, "You'll find out," but also warning America would not stand for Iran shooting down a U.S. surveillance drone.
Iran made a mistake.
Pentagon officials saying an unarmed, unmanned drone was flying over the Gulf of Oman when it was taken out by an Iranian missile.
This drone was in international waters. Clearly, we have it all documented. It's documented scientifically, not just words.
But President Trump also suggesting it may have happened by accident.
I find it hard to believe it was intentional, if you want to know the truth. I think that it could have been somebody who was loose and stupid that did it.
Iran is saying that's not the case. An Iranian military commander saying their defense system bravely shot down the U.S. spy aircraft because it had trespassed into Iranian airspace, warning that while Iran doesn't want war, they are ready for it. The Trump administration has accused Iran of attacking international ships operating in the region, and today's drone downing is likely seen as another escalation of their accused aggression. Senator Lindsey Graham saying President Trump needs to respond.
This is an enemy of mankind, and if you're not willing to take this enemy on, you'll regret it.
But others are urging caution, including House Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
I don't think the president wants to go to war. There's no appetite for going to war in our country.
For more, we turn to Mideast analyst and author Dr. Rob Sobhani. Dr. Sobhani, thanks for joining us. The prevailing thought had been that Iran wanted to pressure the U.S. allies to get it to end the sanctions. How does shooting down a drone help them accomplish that?
Mr. Whitman, I think one of the biggest challenges the United States has faced, frankly, over the last 40 years has been the behavior of Iran, whether towards our allies in the Middle East, such as Israel, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, or more broadly, the United States directly, from the taking of American diplomats hostage 40 years ago, to the bombings that we saw in Saudi Arabia against American servicemen, Air Force personnel to be precise. And so when we look at the broad brush of U.S.-Iran relations, we find that this has been one of the most difficult relations for Washington to manage.
Okay, but again, just getting back to the current increase in tensions on both sides, the general thinking was Iran is trying to pressure our allies to get some ease on the sanctions. Have they made a misstep thinking that shooting down this drone would help them do that?
I believe the Iranians, in this particular instant, Mr. Whitman, feel that maybe the Europeans will step in, maybe the Asians, China, and also Russia will step in, because I believe that they too realize that picking a fight with the United States is not in their best interest. And so I do believe that if Iran is to be found responsible for this drone attack, then it may very well have been a reason for getting the Europeans directly, aggressively involved.
Iran, during this increase in tension, seems to have chosen their targets and attacks pretty carefully thus far. The drone was unmanned. The tankers in the Gulf, if they were responsible, were hit above the waterline so that they wouldn't sink. Even the recent attacks inside Iraq, which the U.S. thinks Iran was behind, only 3 Iraqis were injured and no Americans. They certainly could have made those attacks more brutal, worse if they wanted to. Should we read anything into that?
I believe that the Iranian regime is testing the resolve of the United States. It's a drone here. It could be an attack on a tanker tomorrow, but it could very well escalate into targeting our forces in Bahrain. The United States naval base, the Fifth Fleet, is in Bahrain. We have 10,000 soldiers in Qatar. And so I believe the Iranian regime is testing the American resolve at this point. They're ratcheting it up step by step.
Iran says it shot down the drone. Are you convinced that they were behind the other attacks that the U.S. has tried to pin on them? Does it fit in with what you know of the Iranian government and their approach?
100%. One of the fundamental teachings of Shia faith is to deceive. The Arabic word for it is taghyeh. And so it is very, very easy for the Iranian regime to speak from both sides of the mouth. I'm convinced that if the United States government is indeed implicating Iran, the Iranian regime, then it is indeed the fact.
So how does this all get walked back short of military conflict? Can it be?
I certainly believe that it is in no one's interest for this to escalate. You know, a lot of analysts have focused on the Persian Gulf, the Strait of Hormuz, as a place where oil flows to consumers around the world to the tune of close to 30%. But let's also keep in mind that natural gas, which lights hospitals in Europe, which lights hospitals in Taiwan and Japan, also flows through the Persian Gulf. Any escalation into a war situation, either directly with the United States and Iran or indirectly with our allies in Iran, could disrupt global economy. And that is in no one's interest.
Well, let me challenge your optimism that there's a way out of this, because it feels like Iran and the U.S. are in no-win situations diplomatically right now. If Iran agrees to talk, it validates President Trump ripping up the nuclear deal and applying sanctions. If the U.S. agrees to talk, it makes Trump look weak and unresponsive to the provocation. Does either side have a way to save face here? Is that why the president suggested the shoot-down might have been a mistake by an individual actor?
I think it's very clear that President Trump certainly understands that the United States will not benefit from a war with Iran. I believe the American public feels the same. The Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, expressed this. But I do believe that the calculus over the last 40 years between Washington and Tehran has not been the correct narrative. We have viewed this either in the prism of either containment, appeasement, war, or no war. Missing from this calculus is the fact that the Iranian regime inside is a weak regime. It's a regime on the brink of economic collapse. And one factor that is missing from this entire calculus is that the Iranian people could very well be our best ally.
Another sticking point here could be the U.S. backing of Saudi Arabia, rival to Iran in the region, including that arms sale emergency declaration that the Senate just voted against, but will probably still happen. Can the U.S. and Iran ever find a workable relationship if the U.S. is seen as having a finger on the scale for Saudi Arabia?
The fact that Iran is the largest Shia country in the region, Saudi Arabia is the largest Sunni country in the region, and there is indeed a historic rivalry between Saudi Arabia and Iran, especially after the victory of the Islamic Revolution in 1979, espousing the export of this revolution. I don't think that relations between Iran and Saudi Arabia are going to get any better anytime soon. And in fact, if there is one trigger area that should be of concern to American policymakers, is the escalation of conflict between Riyadh and Tehran.
But it seems like this White House is particularly close with the Saudis, and even the Jared Kushner Mideast peace plan seems to involve or lean heavily on the Saudis. Is that a worry for you in trying to resolve these current tensions with Iran?
I believe that the geopolitical value of Saudi Arabia to the United States speaks for itself. Saudi Arabia is a big country. We have trade relations with that country. We have energy relations with that country. But I do not believe that a close relation between Washington and Saudi Arabia necessarily impacts what we should do on Iran. Again, I go back to the point, the United States has an opportunity to make a fundamental change by changing the narrative and focusing more on the wishes of the Iranian people. That is where I believe American foreign policy should be focused on.
And then we get to the trust question, trust in the White House, Defense Department, even our intelligence community. A lot of Americans, including any number of elected officials, have zero trust in this president and the White House, given his track record with the truth. That means a lot of people are not going to give him the benefit of any doubt. Is that a factor? How big of a variable is that, and how big of a problem, not just on the U.S. side, but for Iran when dealing with the administration?
You make a very, very good point. I think the Iranian regime is hoping that the Trump administration is over in the next election cycle that we have in the United States in 2020. But that's a few months away from now. That said, again, if one looks at the broad brush of U.S.-Iran relations, the fact is that the Iranian regime actually is the one that over the last 40 years has escalated and has caused damage to these relations, from taking of American diplomats hostage to the murder of American servicemen in Afghanistan and in Iraq, and of course, the bombings that they've done throughout the world, the Jewish Center in Buenos Aires, Argentina, our Air Force personnel in Saudi Arabia. So the point is that the Iranian regime is the one that is at fault.
Got about 30 seconds here. You've mentioned the Iranian public a couple of times during this interview. How does the average Iranian feel about the United States and about Americans?
Very positive. The United States has one of the best track records when it comes to the Iranian people. The internet has allowed for the free flow of information back and forth between the two. There are many success stories among Iranian Americans in the United States. The people of Iran know that they want to be the next incarnation of those successful Iranian Americans. And so I believe that if there's one population in the Middle East that is ready, willing, and able to be friends with the United States, it's the population of Iran.
Rob Sobhani is a professor at Georgetown University specializing on U.S. foreign policy towards the Middle East. Dr. Sobhani, thanks for the insight. I appreciate it.
Thanks a lot.
Up next on RFL, ABC News political director Rick Klein joins us to look at the politics surrounding the rising tensions with Iran and also the latest controversies involving Joe Biden and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.